So, welcome to Blush to Bloom. And today I'm delighted to welcome you, Gene Monterastelli. Gene, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I appreciate the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation for sure.
So, Gene, you are an EFT tapping expert. You're going to share with us what that is and how EFT tapping can help people who live with blushing and fear of blushing. But you came into this through your own experience of social anxiety. And you've also, not only are you expert in EFT tapping, but you've also studied hypnotism, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, guided imagery, meridian-based tapping protocols, and parts work. So you've got a holistic set of experiences, and you bring all that together in your tapping work. And we're so looking forward to hearing about EFT tapping and how it can help people who suffer from chronic blushing or erythrophobia. And often, because you had your own journey with social anxiety, often that blushing is accompanied with social anxiety, not always. So it'd be lovely to hear your perspectives of that. So welcome. I'm so delighted to have this conversation with you.
You bet.
So perhaps, Jean, to start off with, you could explain to us what EFT tapping is.
Absolutely. I'll give you the super, super short version so we can get into something that's accessible. Basically, what happened was in the late 70s and early 80s, they started doing scientific research on acupuncture. And depending on your disposition, you could be saying we are trying to expand the healing canon, or you could have a cynical disposition or saying we're trying to prove this Eastern stuff is crap and push it out of the way. Regardless of the motivation of the research, what they found that not only was acupuncture useful for pain management, they found that it was also really successful for phobias and depression as well. And
Mhm.
so Dr. Roger Callahan, who lived in San Diego, California, psychologist, was reading about this. And this is really fascinating. And I don't want to go to acupuncture school. And so because he was in San Diego, his office was the pool house. And he had a new client who was coming to see him for the first time, who had a severe fear of water that was so severe she could not shower. Now, it
Right.
is a little treacherous when you are going to the person for help when you have to walk by a swimming pool, and that's the scariest thing in the world. That wasn't by design, that's just the architecture of Southern California. And so she was reporting like nervousness in her stomach, which is a common feeling with fear. And so Dr. Callahan had read these studies. And in looking at the meridian system that a lot of Chinese medicine is based on, he knew this point right here under the eye in Chinese medicine was associated with the stomach.
With
And
the
so
stomach.
she was experiencing something in her stomach. And so he just had her start tapping under her eye. And 20 minutes later, she was in the backyard splashing water on her head.
Wow.
And that was his response as well. He's like, this is fascinating. And so over the course of the 35-ish intervening years from there, he has taught lots of folks who have then iterated and evolved. You know, the most common name that most people know is Gary Craig. So Callahan called his thought field therapy because he was saying something energetically is in our thought field that we're clearing.
Mhm.
Gary Craig, who was one of his students, came up with a simpler version, which is close to what we're going to be doing today, that he called EFT Emotional Freedom Technique. Now,
Right.
personally, I don't necessarily love the name um, because it's a post-transformational description. And for me, the goal is not to be free from my emotions, but to have a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. And so it's not about eliminating, it's not about being free from them, but it's having the freedom to show up in that way. And so as time has passed, you know, there are numbers of different names of it. Colloquially, we just call it tapping because what you are doing is instead of sticking needles, you're physically tapping on those tapping points.
Okay.
And it is something that can be self-applied. So at this point in my life, almost all of my client work is done over Zoom. And in that circumstance, obviously, I can't be tapping someone through the screen. It's something where I am doing it and they are mirroring it back. You
Right.
know, lots of my students, lots of my clients have a daily or a weekly tapping practice that they can apply to themselves. So the reason why I'm such a huge fan of it is one, it is super, super fast. Of all of the tools that I've studied and that I've been connected to, it is the most efficient of the tools. The other part is you can do it anywhere, anytime. You know, you mentioned, you know, I'm trained in hypnosis, and to do proper induction work, it requires a very special relationship to be able to hypnotize someone unless you're in a still, quiet room. It's possible, but it's harder. Where with tapping, one time I live here in New York City and I had a friend visiting me, and we were walking up Amsterdam on the Upper West Side of New York, and we're talking about, she goes, well, let's do it. And I'm like, well, you want to go into a coffee shop? She's like, no. And we literally just stepped to the sidewalk on a Friday night in busy New York City and was able to do an intervention in 3 or 4 minutes right there, because it's just that malleable. It's that easy. I'm actually super, super connected with an organization called the Peaceful Heart Network, who has brought the tool to 300,000 refugees and immigrants in places where we're dealing with, you know, language barriers and lurching in large groups. And so it's something that's just super applicable and easy to get to. Because the reality is, like, you do not teach a baby to suck its thumb. It sucks its thumb because it's self-soothing. So what do you do when you're stressed? You go like this. You go like this. Those are tapping points. What do you do when you're thinking? Those are tapping points. What do you do when you're surprised? Those are tapping points. And so we're already tuning into and connecting with these tools because they're self-soothing. Tapping is just taking the stuff that the wisdom that is there that creates relief, organizing it in a way. And now there's been huge amounts of scientific research. There's been over 220 published studies in the English language, another 100 studies published in languages other than that. Like, we're to the point now where it's not like, huh, this is interesting, but we can actually see. Like my friend, Dr. Peta Stapleton, who is faculty at Bonn University, a couple of years ago, they gave her access to a functional MRI, and she could actually measure neurological change. So we've gone from, for lack of a better word, woo-woo crap, to something that is now having some really lovely scientific underpinnings, so we can see that it's actually valid.
Fantastic. It sounds fantastic. Can't wait to hear about it. Um, I just want to check something if I understood correctly. So, did I understand correctly that it's about being okay with your emotions? So, when we're talking about blushing,
Yeah.
the fear of blushing, the tapping, the goal of the tapping is to be okay with the fear. Did I understand that?
It's not necessarily. So part of it is being okay with who we are, but part of it is about having, and so this is the phrase that I go back to over and over again, a proportionate, well-informed emotional response. So I'll give you both of those pieces. So as I sit here in my apartment in Brooklyn, New York, I am 9 miles from the Bronx Zoo. It is appropriate that I'm afraid of tigers. But if I never left my apartment because there is a tiger 9 miles away in the zoo, that is a disproportionate emotional response.
Right.
Now, I don't want to be in a circumstance where I lose my fear and I go to the zoo and I climb over the fence and I try and get a cuddle. Like, I want a proportionate emotional response.
Yeah.
Misinformed. We finish the interview. I walk out my office door. I walk into my kitchen. I see a mouse running across the floor. I jump on the table and I scream like a 5-year-old. That's a misinformed response because there's no actual danger there. You know, when a loved one dies, it's appropriate to have grief.
Yeah.
You know, so the goal is not getting rid of the emotions, and the goal is not just going, huh, this is my emotional experience and that's what it's going to be, but it's calibrating that emotional experience, because emotions are just information. And each emotion has a different information that it's trying to convey. The information of grief is, I am disconnected from something that is important. The information of frustration is, things aren't going the way that I want. The information of fear is, there is danger. The information of overwhelm is, I don't have enough resource to go and do what I need to do. The information of embarrassment is, I am being seen as less than, I'm going to be judged, and it is unsafe. And so when the emotions come forward, they're trying to convey something. You know, when I am walking the streets of New York at 1:30 in the morning, it makes sense that I'm a little bit on edge and I'm not just walking around with my earbuds in. That is well informed. But on a sunny day in my neighborhood where I know all of my neighbors, if I don't leave my apartment because of fear, it has now gone too far. And so the tool is about turning the dials up and down and bringing the right information to that spot. And what's really important to also recognize is, the information we hold in our conscious mind and the information we hold in our subconscious mind is not the same thing. You
Mhm.
know, like people who are afraid of mice will tell you intellectually, it is not dangerous. It is more scared of me than I am of it. But in the moment, it doesn't matter what I intellectually understand. And so the work, and one of the reasons why tapping is so effective is it, through a process that's called memory consolidation, it allows us to go into the belief system that is in the subconscious mind and rewrite it into something that is useful. And so that for
Sounds-
me is the key word. It's
Yeah.
useful. What
Yeah.
is the way for me to act that is useful? Because in some circumstances, you know, if I am in a household as a child with a bipolar parent, it's really useful for me to have my head down and not be noticed because it's safe. Now, when I'm 35 years old at work, and I'm keeping my head down so I'm not noticed to be safe, that is no longer a useful approach. It was a well adapted response in one context, it's a maladapted response in the other context. And so
So
the tool set is just about calibrating our responses so we're comfortable inside of our own skin.
so funny that you should use that particular, well, not funny, funny, interesting that you should use that particular example, because that is how I grew up with a
Yeah.
bipolar parent. And so I did
Yes,
completely,
absolutely. Yeah.
because I'm in this journey. I'm helping people cure their blushing, because I used to suffer from chronic blushing,
Yeah.
and so often, we've been through it, and so we can help people go through it themselves. And I know that you came to your tapping through social anxiety. So before we actually get on to the
Yeah.
tapping and what people can do, would you share with us a little bit your own personal story about
Yeah.
social
So
anxiety?
so yeah, so my experience is the opposite of most people. I spent my 20s and 30s as a performer. Performed in front of more than 1.7 million people around the US and Canada, was the Pope's opening act, like did all of these things. And I couldn't ask for help in a store. I couldn't answer my own phone. At the time, I lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and the way that the bus system worked at the airport was you just told the bus driver to stop when you got near your car. I couldn't do that.
Mhm.
And literally, I would ride the bus until someone else said stop, and then I would get off with my clothing bag and my 50 pounds of props because I'm a juggler, and would then have to like carry it up and down the stairs to the parking garage because that's what was comfortable and safe. And what I
Mhm.
came to realize was, and this is in hindsight, not at the moment, is the thing that was scary was entry. Once I was in a conversation, I was fine. But it was that, and the reason why stage was so easy is you can conduct an audience. If you have the skills on stage, I can make you loud, I can make you quiet, I can make you lean in, I can make you, but it's a single unit that is actually really easy to manage because a group is easier to manage. Where one
Mhm.
person is unpredictable. One person, and the way it felt in my body was I felt like the little kid that the adults were making the older kids tolerate. So I was tagging along only because someone else said I had to be allowed to tag along. And therefore, I didn't feel like I belonged in that particular way.
Mhm.
And fears are those things that grow over time. So I'm afraid this is going to go badly. And then afterwards, you and I have a lovely conversation, but I'm afraid of this conversation looking good. When the conversation ends, my first thought is, oh, it was so stupid when I misspoke and I said this thing. And I'm not going to remember the 30 minutes of lovely conversation and the give and take and what we're getting a chance to do. Because I'm worried it's going to go wrong, I'm going to remember the things that go wrong. So I give a little dollop of proof to that fear. And so
Yeah.
then the next circumstance, I notice what goes wrong. And so what fears do is they grow logarithmically. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like a hockey stick curve. It's not linear. It's growing, it's growing, it's growing, and then all of a sudden it grows really, really quickly. And
Yeah.
that's how people end up
They
being agoraphobic.
fluctuate, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah. And so by the time I'd gotten into my early 30s, it was to the point that my life was getting smaller and smaller. And I was okay, like I wasn't okay with that, but that was tolerable. But what was happening was I had two people in my life who were trying to do really big things. And in order for them to do those really big things, they needed help. I was happy to help, which required me to make phone calls, which was the scariest thing in the world for me emotionally. And so I wasn't making the phone calls, and then I was lying to my friends about not making the phone calls. And so all of a sudden, com- compromising what I was doing to protect myself was now undermining the people I loved. So
Mhm.
for me, that was my rock bottom moment. It was like, okay, this is no longer tolerable for me. It's one thing for my life to get smaller. It's another thing for me to screw up other people's success. And so we were traveling, and I had this long layover in the Pittsburgh airport, and I literally was just walking laps around the Pittsburgh airport because I was going to be sitting on a bunch of flights. I'm super dyslexic, so I love audiobooks, I love podcasts, I love all of those things. And someone was doing a book launch, and part of the book launch, they were doing a bunch of interviews ahead of time, and it was about taking action. And they interviewed a tapping expert who's now a very dear friend of mine. Before the description, I knew nothing about tapping. After the description, I knew less. And which is so funny because my friend is such a good teacher. I want to go back and find this thing to see what he did. Doesn't matter. It stirred enough interest in me that I went and found a little manual. And so I did the thing at that point in my life was the single scariest thing I could imagine: online dating. And where I lived in Baltimore at the time, there were two neighborhoods that were about a 25-minute walk from me. Now, in hindsight, I would not recommend someone doing this by themselves. It just worked out for me. Now, as a well-formed practitioner, I jumped into the deep end. But basically, what I did was I'd connect with someone. I'd say, hey, I love everything Mount Vernon, pick a place. And as I walked to the date, I would literally do the tapping protocol as I walked to the date because I was being exposed to the thing I was afraid of. And tapping works really, really well in an exposure context. And 6 weeks later, my social anxiety was done. Done, done, done. Like just gone, gone, gone.
Okay.
And so at that point, I went, this is kind of interesting. And literally just started sharing tapping because I found it interesting and fascinating. Started a hobby blog where I was just writing stuff out of curiosity because I was curious about it. And 9 months in, someone sent me an email and said, can you start selling stuff? And then 6 months after that, someone sent me an email like, I like your style. Do you do phone sessions? I'm like, oh, right. This isn't a hobby. This is something that's much more profound than that. So that's kind of how I found my way to tapping directly in the light of my social anxiety.
Yeah, and that you actually did it on yourself as you were walking towards
Yep. Yeah.
the trigger for you.
Yeah.
Because I also teach that when you get into movement, when you get into physical movement, you physically take action. Tapping is one way, but any kind of anything that we want to do when we actually get into physical movement, that changes everything. Knowing something intellectually is one thing. Listening to this recording, that's great, but that's only 20%. Everybody has to get into action. So I love that.
And the beautiful thing about, the reality, which can be a beautiful thing about the subconscious mind, is when it comes to our emotional response, the subconscious mind has a really hard time of distinguishing the difference between what we imagine and what we are doing. And so when I'm thinking of working with a client on a fear of some sort, maybe it's like presentation, awesome. Imagine you're giving a presentation at work. That is enough just to get us going in the right direction to start finding the aspects of those particular things. When we're dealing with an issue like embarrassment and blushing, like it's really easy to tune into the moments that felt really, really bad in the past where we experienced this, or to be fearful of being in some social setting and all of a sudden, we're glowing like Rudolph's nose and how uncomfortable that can be. And like, we don't have to be there to get to the first level of it
Yeah.
because the way the subconscious mind works and our ability to access those experiences
All right.
outside of
So that's a wonderful lead in then. So something, it's different people have different triggers, but one of the universal triggers of people who have chronic blushing and fear of blushing is often a meeting situation. They're in a
Yep.
meeting, whether it's a date like you had or a work meeting. What should they do if they want to tap on something like that?
Yeah.
What should they do?
So tapping, so like for me, there's like just a really basic formula in my head that creates tapping. Stimulate the tapping points, tune into a stimulus. That's it. That equals relief. Add one to the other. So what we need to do is we need to be tuning into what is going on. Now, for people who have seen tapping before, even if they haven't done any training or they have some basic training, oftentimes what happens with tapping is we are given a reminder phrase. And a reminder phrase is something that we are saying out loud, which is awesome except for the fact that when you step away from a conversation like this, or you step away from a video and you have to come up with those reminder phrases on your own, all of a sudden that becomes really overwhelming. The beautiful thing about tapping is simply stimulating the points creates change. So much so, my morning routine involves me setting a timer for 10 minutes on my watch and tapping without words. Now, as things come up, I make notes and whatever, but I'm not saying anything. I'm just being present to what is going on. So if we have something that is discomforting, basically, let's say in this case, I'm afraid of being in this particular circumstance. What I would do is I would just take a nice big deep breath. I would tune into the fear, and then I would say 0 to 10, how big is the fear? And then I would just write that number down.
Okay.
Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on the tapping points, and I'm just going to go through all the tapping points a couple of times. I'm going to take a nice big deep breath, and I'm going to tune back into the fear, and I'm going to rate it 0 to 10. Now, when we do that, we can have one of 3 responses. All 3 responses are great. Response number 1 is the fear goes down. That means we're on the right path, and we can decide if we want to keep going or stopping. So let's say it was at a 7 and it's now at a 5. I can keep tapping if I want, or I can be comfortable with that. Response number 2 is it actually gets worse. This is good news. It doesn't feel like it's good news, but it's good news because I'm now more present to the thing I'm actually afraid of. I'm sure you've been in a circumstance where you have an injury, a hip, a knee, a foot, and as you navigate the day, you don't think about it. And the moment you get home and you sit down, you go, all of a sudden your hip starts to throb. Sitting down did not make the hip throb, but all day you were thinking about everything else. And so you turned that signal off. And the moment I'm no longer moving, the body goes, hey, dude, we're injured here. Be careful. So sometimes I might think of a circumstance, and I'm sure you've had this before, where you're like describing something that happened, frustration with customer support. And as you're telling the story, you can feel yourself getting more and more frustrated as you're recounting the story, because telling the story doesn't make you more frustrated, but because you're becoming fully present to it. So sometimes when I tune into something, it actually is going to go up. But what happens is it goes up, then it comes back down. Okay. The third thing is if it stays exactly the same, basically all that means is we just need to tune in. We don't have enough details, and we tune in more clearly. So it's really as simple as imagining being in the circumstance, naming the emotion that I'm feeling or emotions. It could be hesitancy, it could be fear, it could be judgment. Name them all. Rate them from 0 to 10, and then just do a couple of rounds tapping on the tapping points, which we'll show you here in a moment. And that's it.
So let me recap, see if I understand. So I want to give myself a little tapping session. I'm going to use the example of a meeting. So I'm worried about this meeting. I know that they're going to ask me questions. For example, I'm working on a project and I know my boss might ask me a question, and I always blush in front of my boss, hypothetical situation. So first of all, I sit down and I put myself, when you say tune in, you put yourself into that. You imagine that you're there in the meeting room and you're concerned. Is that what it is?
So what you're going to do is you're going to imagine the thing that triggers the emotional response that still feels safe. Okay. Like we don't have to go diving all the way into the lion den. So for example, like I have worked with clients who have had perpetrators who have injured them. And it might not be safe for them to imagine having a conversation with the person.
Right.
But it could, like, the as depth that I could go is I can think of the person's name or I can see their face in my mind.
Okay.
And so what I don't want people to do is go, okay, the scariest thing in the world for me and the place that this is the scariest is, and I'm going to imagine every single aspect of it. Because the thing I don't want you to do is I don't want you to be so emotional you can't be present to what's going on, or to be so emotional that you're re-traumatizing yourself from those scenarios. So for me, I'm going to creep up on the thing until the intensity is like, ooh, yeah, that's something I feel. So it could be, I have a meeting tomorrow. I imagine myself walking into work. I imagine myself walking into the meeting room. I imagine the boss coming in. And once I get to the point where it's like, okay, this is bigger than a 5 emotionally, great. Let's just stop right there. And that's the place we're going to tap. And then after we do a couple rounds, then we go back to the beginning. And it's like, I have a meeting tomorrow. I'm walking into work. I'm walking into the room. I'm walking and the moment I get something that's big enough to go after, then I do that. The
Okay.
thing that is super, super important with this and all transformation is we need to err on the side of safety. I
Yeah.
understand people's desire to want transformation, especially for an issue like this that is crippling, that is holding your life back in so many ways where you're not going out into the world because being in the world and being yourself feels so dangerous. And I understand the desire of wanting to do it all right now. The biggest difference between me and the practitioner I was 5 years ago is I work so much gentler and so much slower. And
Yeah.
so give yourself, this is going to create transformation faster than other things that you have tried. But just because it's faster, it doesn't have to be instantaneous. So I want people to be gentle as they're leaning into this.
I'm so with you on that, Gene, because I truly believe from my own personal journey and from the people I work with that the blushing is always linked to some kind of trauma. It may be
Right.
trauma with a big T, it may be trauma with a little t, but we need to be very, very gentle. I talk about
Yeah.
baby
Yep.
steps, because you can't face your trauma head on. You have to go in gently. So I'm so with you on that.
Yeah. And the other thing to kind of like dovetail on that, which I think is really useful, is like the other thing that's really important for me is recognizing the fact that success is not an all or nothing proposition. A number of years ago, I was introduced to a really great framework of judging success by my friend in tapping, compadre Mary Ayres. And it's the idea that we measure success one of three ways, and that's through intensity, duration, and frequency. So, for example, I have a client of mine. We weren't working on this issue, but she was just reporting what was going on in her life. And she said, Gene, it's absolutely amazing. I'm only having seizures 6 days a week. Now,
Mhm.
that sounds horrific, except for the fact she's now in a circumstance where 1 day a week it goes completely as planned and she gets to do everything she wants without being in pain or fear of being in that particular pain.
Yeah,
And so from the outside, seizure 6 days a week, that sucks because it does. But from the inside, the frequency had reduced. Okay.
absolutely.
Intensity is how intense do we respond? Something happens, I get undercut at work or someone says something that's judging my work. I'm angry. And the next time it happens, I'm frustrated. Now,
Mhm.
frustration is no fun. I am still really capable of acting like a jerk and making choices that I'm not proud of out of frustration, but I'm less likely to do that than I am when I am in anger. And
Yeah.
so the intensity has diminished and then duration, at 3 times in my life, erroneously, I have had legal action threatened by clients of mine. One of them even tried to blame me for her frozen pipes. So you can get a sense of like how valid these things were. Now, in all 3 cases, when I got the email, the fear and the overwhelm was exactly the same. So the intensity was exactly the same each time it happened. So the frequency was exactly the same. It was 100%. But the first time it happened, it threw me off emotionally for 36 hours. The second time it happened, it threw me off emotionally for 12 hours. The third time it happened, it threw me off emotionally for 45 minutes. And so even though the frequency and the intensity were the same, the duration that it existed had diminished. And so as we
Yeah,
step into this, I want people to, and I don't mean to like undermine your desire for success, but happiness is outcome divided by expectation. And so if I'm in a circumstance where I'm expecting this to go away forever, if I don't have this go away forever, even if it goes away 99% of the time, I'm going to be dissatisfied because I haven't met my goal. For me, transformation exists in the ER. And what I mean by that is in better, easier, gentler. And so each time we do an intervention like this, it's to make it so it's less intense, it's less frequent, it's less whatever it is, even though that still feels like a failure because I'm experiencing it. It's important for us to keep that in that context because if we just want to be better, we're only going to notice the times it's still going bad.
yeah, and I think that's very true with blushing, and I do see that as well with my clients. There are some instances where there is a complete transformation, and now people don't blush anymore, and they're off doing all the things they wanted to do. And in other cases, it's like, okay, well, I can stop it taking over. I can nip it in the bud sometimes. In some situations, I just don't blush when I used to. And
Yep,
if I do blush, I don't mind as much. I'm
that's
not
right.
ashamed as much. So that is progress.
Yep,
And it
absolutely.
means that they can take steps and they can live the life they want. So but I see what you mean, absolutely, about the frequency, how often you blush, the duration, how long that blushing is, and how much you beat yourself up for
Right.
afterwards.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But also with blushing, because there's a blushing cycle that I've created. Often with the blushing, it's the anticipatory anxiety, the
Absolutely.
concern
Yeah.
going to blush. And when I ask people in this blushing cycle, what's the bit that you wish you could change most? It's rarely the blushing, actually.
Right.
It's more the anticipation, the beating yourself up afterwards, the shame
Yeah.
associated with it. It's not the actual blushing. So I really hear you on that. So I know that everybody listening is like, okay, come on. So we've heard, we put ourselves, we tune in to the situation. So we don't go straight to the
Yeah.
really scary thing.
So in this case, to go back to your little circle there, like let's do the anticipation it's going to happen. Like that
Okay.
fear, that anxiety, that whatever. And so if you're in a circumstances, you're joining us in this case, if that's just something that's ever present, great. If not, think of something that's going to be happening sometime this week where you're going to be there and your mind is already going, oh my gosh, I'm worried, I'm worried, I'm worried. And let's use that worry about it's going to happen as the thing that we're going to start with.
Okay. So what should people do? They get to
Great.
that anticipatory
So
anxiety. Now,
tune into that anticipation, and 0 to 10, how big does that feel? And we call it SUD, subjective unit of distress. So it doesn't matter if your 7 matches my 7. We just need a baseline so we can measure and see what is going on. So you just tune into that and you just jot that little number down.
mhm. Okay. And then
Great.
what? The next step.
Then after that, what you're going to do is you're going to take a nice big deep breath. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the points, talk our way through them. You're going to tap along with me. And then what we'll do is we'll go through them a second time where we're not giving instruction. Okay.
Okay.
So everybody who's watching along, just take a nice big deep breath. First point is the side of the hand. Now, there are points that are on both sides of the body. It doesn't matter which side of the body that you use.
Okay.
I have a tendency to tap with my right hand one-handed because that is my dominant hand, but I tap all day with clients, so I switch back and forth. There's some people who tap on both sides of the body, but like side of the hand, it doesn't matter if it's the right hand or the left hand. Some people will even do both of them together, so don't overthink that. So we start at the side of the hand. Okay. And then for me, the next point I use is the tippy top of the head. So right there at the crown, be gentle. Your brain is under there. The pressure you apply with the tapping does not increase the efficacy of the tapping. So gentle taps is enough. When I was teaching, when my father first learned this a week later, my mother called me and said, you need to talk to your father. He's going to bruise himself. So point number 3 is the eyebrow point. I'm going to take my glasses off to show you. It's as far down as you can get on your eyebrow before you fall into your nose. So it's just right there on the edge. Side of the eye, basically, if you were following your glasses forward to the edge of the eye socket right there at the ridge, if your vision is blurring, you're doing it wrong. This should never be painful. If one of the points is painful, you can just touch and rub, don't tap on it, or you can skip a point. It's okay to skip points. The next point's under the eye. This is just directly below your pupil. This one for me has a tendency to be very tender because your sinus cavities are under there and I'm someone who deals with a lot of allergies. So be gentle.
Mm-hmm. Especially
Under the nose is just between the nose and your lip. The point that we call the chin point isn't actually the tip of the chin. It's the little divot. You know, back in the grungy 90s when I had a flavor saver, we'd be tapping right there.
Yeah.
Okay. For the collarbone point, I just find it easier to take a flat hand and just tap on your collarbone. There's a precise spot in there, but there is no consequence for missing the spot. As long as you're not poking out an eye or sticking a hand in a wound, you're okay. And then the last spot I like to use is under the arm. Under the arm is exactly in your midline. If you're wearing a bra, it's about bra strap height. And as you poke around in there, it might be a little bit tender. And if you just tap with a flat hand in there, it's going to work as well. I oftentimes use the fingertips, but just kind of do that. So those are the basic points. So I want everybody to take a nice big deep breath.
Okay. So quick question. So
Yeah.
when we're doing that, we're doing these tappings, we're going
Yeah.
around in that order that you said. In our minds, what's our mind? What are we doing with our minds, with our thoughts?
So like being aware of the fear is enough, but this is a mechanical process. So one of the very first studies around tapping that showed its efficacy was they were able to demonstrate just stimulating the points, cortisol levels dropped, and it was measured both in saliva and blood. So this is a
Okay.
mechanical process. And what I mean by that is there is a mechanism involved. I don't have to understand the mechanism or think of anything when I take an aspirin. There's a mechanism in that drug that affects the body. There's
I
a
don't need to
mechanism
be
that's involved.
thinking of anything in particular. I can if I want, but if I don't,
So if you're going to think of something in particular, just tune into an aspect of what is going on. And
okay.
with fear, for me, the easiest thing to tune into is how is it showing up in my physical experience?
All right.
Tightness in my chest, butterflies in my stomach, sweaty palms, crouching down, like just being aware of that particular thing.
So I could do a body scan, just tune into my body
Yeah.
while I'm thinking and
Yeah. I mean, like,
just
you know,
observe.
yeah. So for example, if tune into the anxiety, 0 to 10, how big is the anxiety? It's a 7. I'm like, great. How do you know it's a 7? Like, what is showing up in your body? And you're like, oh, I know it's a 7 because it's hard for me to breathe right now. I know it's a 7 because there are butterflies in my stomach. I had a client one time describe the butterflies as dragons. It wasn't butterflies. That's how tumultuous it was. I had a client one time, like 0 to 10, how big is the anxiety? And she's like 17. Awesome. Like, this isn't scientific. We're just trying to be aware of what is going on. But if in the beginning you're just paying attention to the tapping points, that's going to be enough to be useful. Then we just tune back into it. So
All right.
let's go through a second time. This time we don't have to talk about what's going on. So everybody take a nice big deep breath, retune back into the exact same circumstance you had before, re-rate it 0 to 10 for me. Could be the same number, could be bigger, could be smaller, doesn't matter. But we're going to use this as our new baseline. And then just play follow the leader, side of the hand. And when we do this, it's just 5 to 7 taps. Tippy top of the head, eyebrow, side of the eye, under the eye, under the nose, chin, collarbone, under the arm. Nice big deep breath. And like you said about this idea of movement, I love giving a big stretch afterwards. When I used to tap with my buddy Alan Davidson, I'd tell him to stretch and he would go and just shake the whole thing off. And then what we do is we just take a nice big deep breath and then we just tune back in to that setting and see where the anxiety is now.
Okay.
Write
it down,
and then write it down. And so then at that point, if you want to do it again, you can. And like we said, when we're thinking about the meeting or thinking about the social setting is going to do it. Now, when I think about it, it doesn't happen. It's like, okay, great. Now I'm going to imagine it's Friday night and it's 90 minutes before I go out the door and I'm starting to get ready. I tune into that. I see where the anxiety is in that. Then I imagine myself walking out the door, getting in the car, getting on the subway, whatever it is, getting there, walking in, seeing the people. And so just slowly, gently creeping up on the experience and feeling it release. Now, the other thing is let's say it's happening Friday night. It would make a lot of sense to spend 5 minutes doing this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday leading up to it.
Yeah.
As you're getting ready,
you're already anxious.
Yeah. And just yeah. And the other thing that is really one of the reasons why I think this is so lovely is the reason why you are afraid is because there is a context plus a belief. Okay. The context is I am in the social setting. The belief is this is horrible and I'm going to die once this happens. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm tapping, I'm not just tapping on how I feel right now. And I'm not just tapping on the social engagement Friday night. I'm tapping on that belief. And so what's happening is I'm slowly undermining my belief that saying this is dangerous. Because that fear that we're feeling ahead of time is this is dangerous.
All right.
And so that's going to go away over time.
So on that, I'm with you completely. So it's that fear that the body is primed, the body has developed a reaction to the fight flight response. And so when I'm tapping on it, if I've understood you correctly, you don't actually have to be in your mindset, you don't have to be concentrating on the fear. You can if you want, but it doesn't
Yeah.
actually make any difference. It's the actual locations and the meridians that, like you said, the aspirin works without taking any action. So
Right.
although we're talking about fear, because it is questions that people have, they don't actually have to think about the thing that they're fearful of. Is that right?
So the more tuned into it we are, the more effective the tool is.
Okay.
But in this circumstance, like when I have a client who's crying, I don't go 0 to 10. How sad are you? Tell me why you
Yeah.
are sad. Like we're fully present to that thing. One
Yes.
of in some ways, tapping on fear is one of the easiest things to tap on, only because fear always wins.
Yeah.
Like if we are feeling fear, it is going to override everything else in our system. My buddy Brad Yates likes to talk about the idea is it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the scaredest.
Yes.
7,000 years ago, two of our ancestors were out in the wild and a big fuzzy thing with giant teeth showed up. And one of them felt fear faster than the other. It's the old dumb joke. People are camping. Bear shows up. One of the guys starts putting on tennis shoes. And the other guy goes, "You're not going to outrun the bear." And he's like, "I don't have to. I just have to outrun you." And so our ancestor who felt fear the fastest got the head start, so they didn't get eaten. So they were the ones who procreated. So the next generation has the super fear being, and in the next generation, whoever hears the fear the fastest gets the head start. And
So we
so
get very good at it.
fear is our genetic heritage, and it's the reason we exist as a species. And so, because that's the case, if you tune into fear, it's going to be present inside of your body. You
All
don't
right.
have to do a lot of work to turn that up. Where some other emotions, where there's some subtlety to those, having clear understanding of that is more important. Fear, we're going to feel fear. Just thinking about it, the body goes on alert and we're going to be okay.
All right. So we've established, you think of it, I call it's like a ladder. So at the top of the ladder is the thing you're really scared of.
Yep.
And then you're going to decide at which level you're going to start. At around a 5, you're going
Yeah, absolutely.
to.
Yeah.
So we've done that. We do our tapping. We can think about it if we want, or we can just focus on the situation. What do
Yeah.
we actually say?
At this point, I don't want people to say anything at all.
Okay.
Like you're gonna see, like, I have tapping videos. You see lots of tapping practitioners doing scripts, all that sort of. That's really effective. But what I tapping without words is super, super effective.
Okay.
And what I want, and this is just like from teaching, and this is for all of us as we teach stuff, it doesn't matter how good the tool is I'm teaching you if you don't use it.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
I want this to be as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Tune
Okay.
into it, tap, don't worry about anything else, and you are going to have relief. Again, like, I have talked to survivors of the Rwandan genocide whose complex trauma has been transformed with tapping, and they've never said a phrase while they are tapping. It can be useful, it can be great, it's not necessary. Worry about that for later.
And if you were going to do that, it would be when you were one-to-one with a practitioner, and it would be
Yeah. Or
personal.
yeah, or in a circumstance where you have a resource, just because, like, there are lots of things that we experience that make sense as we're experiencing it, but recreating it on our own is really, really hard. Like when you say something, it's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. But when I'm trying to reconstruct it on my own, it's much harder. And so it's a great skill to have. And eventually, if you tap regularly and you get used to the points, integrating that sort of stuff is going to be super easy. And you might be a couple of weeks away from that. But like, know that you don't have to do that in order to be successful with the
All right.
tool.
Okay. And then a question I have from somebody who's interested in this and has already started trying this. They want to know, how often and for how long should I
Yeah.
tap? Should it be every day? Should it be several times a day? And then how long should
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like, how often should I work out and how long should I be doing that workout? It depends. I was working with a client, and this is the most extreme reaction I had. I was doing some humanitarian work in Peru, and dealt with someone who had some of the most complex trauma of anybody I'd ever met in my life. Um, we did 90 seconds of tapping. He drank 48 ounces of water and then slept for 13 hours. Just because like that was as much as he could handle. Just because running 5 miles is good, running 50 miles is not 10 times better. Like there is a limit to what we are doing. So the first thing is err on the side of safety, because when I'm doing work, it's not that I'm just doing work, but I also have what's in front of me. So like when I'm doing really deep work with myself where it might knock me out, I'm doing that on a Tuesday night before I go to bed, or I'm doing it on a Saturday afternoon where I don't have any responsibilities.
Yeah.
So that if I need to take a nap, if I'm done, if I need to whatever, where when I'm tapping at the beginning of my day, we have this lovely conversation. I have classes I'm teaching today. I have clients I have to work with. I am not going to the rawest, scariest part of my experience when I did
Right.
my morning tapping this morning, because that could be disruptive to everything that's happening today.
Yeah.
So it's
So
the
you need,
crappiest answer in the history of the world. It depends.
it
It is
take, you
something
take care.
that, yeah. So it's something that, in my mind, it's going to take a certain number of strikes with a chisel to break a rock up. And so I could do those chisel strikes one every week, or I could do 3 every week, or I could do 1 every day. And so there's going to be time. And again, like chiseling, at a certain point, I get exhausted, so I can't work tomorrow. So there's a limit to that, but we're chipping away at something. And so persistence is something that's going to make sense. As a personal note, I do tapping to start my day every single day just to reset my resource state. Wordless tapping, I'm not thinking about any particular issue. As my day unfolds, if I have an emotion that comes up, overwhelm, disappointment, frustration, I tap in the moment just so I can get back to work. And then once or twice a week, I'm doing a real deep dive into what's going on in my life. And that's either on my own or that's working with a practitioner, because I have a practitioner that I work with regularly, because I'm a bad eyewitness to my own experience. There's so much I can do
Yeah.
on my own, and there's so much I can't. It's like, and that's okay as well. And then the other thing is like the sense of urgency, like if I'm doing something on Friday and it's happening on Friday, I'm obviously going to want to be doing more work on that leading up to that on Friday, because I can't do it once a week because it happened 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And so in a circumstance like that, again, incremental, again, but then to go back to what we talked about earlier about judging success, like if I'm deciding how much work I'm doing based on, I want it to be completely gone, like I am
It's a,
open to the I'm open to the possibility that I will be 100% transformed and completely enlightened. And at the exact same time, I am not buying hats that have a bunch of extra room. So when I get the little Buddhist bulb of enlightenment on the top of my head, there's space there. I'm open to that as a possibility. And I also recognize the fact I am probably going to die a flawed human that is still going through a transformational process. And so as we're engaging with that, being aware in those particular ways as we're thinking about it. So
yeah.
it's a crappy answer. It depends. But like those are the way I think about doing with some frequency.
What I got from you, and I think it's really important just to emphasize, is that when you're doing the deep work that is touching you deeply, that there's pain. You're not going to do that just lightly. You're going to give yourself time where that you'll be able to resource afterwards, whether that's falling asleep
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's you tap into yourself. I didn't mean to use that
It happens all the time.
but you tune into yourself and
Yeah.
you give yourself what you need. If you're doing the deep work, you make sure that
Yeah.
you recuperate afterwards. And if
And the other thing I think that's useful as we think about that is I used to think tapping was an approach. I now think tapping is a tool. And this is what I mean by that. Um, a cutting edge is a tool. And with a cutting edge, I can cut my breakfast. I can open a package. I can whittle a pipe out of a piece of wood. I can do surgery. And even though the tool is exactly the same, there's a big difference between cutting breakfast and cutting out my spleen. And there's a difference between me roughly cutting lettuce and a sushi chef specifically cutting salmon in a specific way. And so the way I think about tapping and how much I'm going to do it is going to depend on the application. If I'm trying to get over overwhelm so I can get on with my day, I can do that in 90 seconds. I can
Yeah.
reset my resource state so the overwhelm is down enough that I can start the next task. Now, when I finish that task and I look at the to-do list, the overwhelm might come rushing back. So I'm going to do 90 seconds of tapping to get rid of the overwhelm. And I might do that 19 times a day. Where when I'm going after something deep that is profound, I'm setting aside chunks of time. I'm setting up time with my practitioner. And so to recognize that the reason that we are tapping every single time can be unique. And therefore, the amount of time, the amount of intensity is in line with what the outcome is that we're trying to get. You know, I don't get a ruler out when I'm measuring, when I'm making my bed. I do get a ruler out when I'm cutting wood to build something. Like the level of precision depends on what I'm trying to do. And so the amount of attention and the amount of time depends on the context.
All right. And then just a little clarification, then I just have one more question after this
Yeah.
is, so you've given us a routine. I
Yeah.
can't remember it, but it starts and we've got the recording so people can
Yep.
follow along with that. Is it the same routine if I'm doing setting my day at the beginning of the day as
Yeah.
if I'm doing my
Yep.
big piece
Yeah.
later on?
So that
Okay.
was, yeah. So that was the it. So when Dr. Callahan came up with thought field therapy, it was a different order for every single issue. And so the
Right.
innovation that Gary Craig brought was what we call a single algorithm. It's the same
Right.
points over and over and over again. And so you don't have to think about it. The other thing is you don't have to do them in the exact order that we taught. Like the reality is, you know, we're just using a small handful of the over 250 points that are part of Chinese medicine.
Yeah.
And so same points, once you have them, you're good. And then at a certain point, it just turns into the old Yellow Pages commercial from here in the United States. Let your fingers do the walking. Like at a certain, like the first 2 or 3 times you're doing it, you're like thinking about the points and that sort of stuff. You know, kind of like when I learned to drive, I was
Yeah.
thinking about it. Now I can drive in New York traffic and tune the radio and eat a sandwich and talk to the, now maybe not the safest thing in the world, but I can do all of those things because I'm not thinking of the mechanics of driving the car very
Okay.
quickly. If you tap every single day for a couple of minutes, 3 days from now, you're never going to think of the tapping points again because it's just going to be automatic.
This muscle, it becomes muscle memory.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And so the last question is from somebody who I asked, you know, what would you ask? What do you
Yeah.
want to ask Gene if in this interview? And he says, I've been tapping consistently for 15 minutes every day, and I feel the difference in the frequency of my blushing, but the fear is still there. Should I tap to accept the fear itself, or should I tap on releasing the resistance to not wanting to blush?
So the place that I would start is the frustration that I feel about the fact that the fear is still present. So
Hmm.
what happens is we have the issue that is the blushing. We
Hmm.
have the fear that is the emotion about the issue. And then we have an emotion about the emotion. I'm frustrated by the fact that I'm still experiencing the fear that I'm experiencing that thing. So I'm going to start the farthest way out. And so
Okay.
in this case, I'm going to tap on the frustration that I still have it, the frustration that I'm putting in all this effort and I'm not having progress fast enough, you know, and then I might have another emotional response is I'm disappointed in myself for being frustrated about the fear about the issue. And so for me, it's like, for me, it's like a jawbreaker where what I'm going to do is like, I can't break my way all the way through it. But if I suck it, the red layer goes away, which makes the jawbreaker a little smaller. And then I suck it and the blue layer goes away. And the issue keeps getting smaller, where ultimately, when I get to the center, which is a little sweet tart in the middle, it just crushes away like sandstone eroding in water. And so, like, I have an experience. I go, well, how do I feel about that experience? How do I feel about that feeling? How do I feel about that feeling? And just keep going out until I can't have
And you
anything
keep tapping
else.
each of those. So the first one, I'm frustrated because I'm still frightened.
That's right.
And
Absolutely.
then,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I'm
And
disappointed. So I tap on the
yeah,
disappointment. And then so you just keep going deeper and you tap on the thing that you find.
yeah. And the nice thing is that, like, again, from a safety point of view, the safest thing for me to think about is the frustration about the fact that I'm feeling fear about the
Okay.
blushing, which might have a traumatic root cause. You know,
Yes.
like you can see that I'm the furthest away from the part that might be treacherous
Yeah.
and is the easiest to respond to
And so
because it's
that's
safe
where
and comfortable for me to deal with the frustration. Then when the frustration goes away, then I get into the fear that this is going to happen and I tap on the fear that's going to
okay.
happen.
Yeah.
You know, the
Yeah.
other thing is for me, is recognizing that our issues are our allies. So the fear that I'm feeling is trying to take care of me. It's just doing a really crappy job at it. And so I am not trying to get rid of the fear. I'm thinking about this as a team member or as an employee. Like we all know people in our lives who are enthusiastically, kind-heartedly incompetent, where they're coming from a good place with all of the energy and they're only making things worse. When I have a disproportionate emotional response, it is something that is enthusiastic, kind-hearted, trying to take care of me. And when I'm crippled with fear, it's doing the opposite of it because I'm stiff and I'm unnimble and I can't make good choices as I step into something. And so when I'm feeling the fear, instead of going, oh, I can't believe I'm feeling this fear, I can go, okay, I'm feeling fear because there's a part of me that wants me to be safe. And it's just misunderstanding the actual danger here.
And
And
then
just
I just,
acknowledging that, just
yeah.
like, and if I'm tapping while I'm doing that, again, it just takes it down another level, you
Mhm.
know, like the question I'm always asking myself is when I have an emotional response, why does my body think this emotional response is helpful? You know, overwhelm is helpful because it's going, dude, you got to focus today. Fear, it's being helpful. It's like, hey, there's real danger out there. Then we get an opportunity to understand and think it through. You know, like I'm forever making my emotions people. You know, I love the Inside Out movies because they
Yeah.
do that so
Yeah.
well.
So good.
And
So
I'm
good.
just making the emotions people and going, okay, great. Again, I want to separate the intention of my system from the way my system is acting to live out that intention. It wants me to be safe. Again, it's great that I'm afraid of tigers. It wants me to be safe because they are so cute and cuddly. They're these giant
Yeah.
cats. Boy, I want to cuddle with them. But again, if I don't leave my apartment because there's one in New York City, now it's doing the exact opposite. It's getting in the way. Its enthusiasm to keep me safe is the problem.
Yeah, no, I've got it, and I think that's a really helpful answer to tap on the actual frustration of
Yeah,
fear, and then see where that goes, because maybe there's another emotion underneath that,
that's
which
right.
again you can
Yeah,
tap on without going head on to the fear, because that's obviously for this particular person that's so far away that they're not ready.
yep.
Even they may not even realize what the thing is that they're
Yeah. And what it also does is like the thing I'm feeling in the moment is the easiest thing for me to access because I'm feeling it in the
right.
moment.
So you go with whatever comes.
Yeah, you just start where it is. And you, again, just again, and again, the analogy for me is just chip away, chip away, chip away, chip away. Because, you know, if you're like, again, if I'm in a circumstance where it's Tuesday and I have a social engagement on a Friday night and I do this tapping and I only panic and feel fear 3 times this week versus feeling it 3 times a day, that's better. It might not feel like a victory, but it is. It's
It is.
better.
It is. Yes. Gene, thank you so much. That was enlightening. It was absolutely enlightening. And also, thank you so much for the way you describe it and the simplicity that you put around it, because it feels, for me, I've only recently even found out about this. It seems so complicated, but you've made it very simple for us. We don't have to worry about what we're going to
Yep.
say. We we don't even have to worry about the order we're going to do it in.
Yep.
Just tap on whatever ever comes and give yourself time leading up to an event. Don't just suddenly do it at the event, although that's probably better than nothing, but
That's
give
right.
yourself time leading up to the event.
Yeah.
And if people want to find out more about your work or contact you, where can they find you?
So the easiest, like the place I would send folks initially is just learntotap.com. It
Okay.
actually goes to a subpage on my website, Tapping Q&A, but learntotap.com, I have a drawing that you can just print out and have the tapping points that make it super easy
Oh,
for you.
brilliant.
There is a 15-minute video that gives a little of the science, a little of the background, does a little deeper dive than the conversation we had here today. That's super, super easy. And then when you're on the website, click the contact link, support@tappingqa.com. I handle all the support emails. I'm on the other side of that. I love, the website is built, it's 18 years old now. It's just built off of answering questions. So if there's anything I can do to be helpful, I am just an email away and love being helpful in that way.
Thank you so much, Gene. And also, I just wanted to also thank you for the work that I didn't realize that you did, the work that you do for trauma victims and so on. Thank you so much for contributing that.
So one thing, if people are interested in any of all of that, in July, every year we actually do a fundraiser that is called 24 Hours of Tapping. It is a free 24-hour live stream in which over 24 hours, I interview this year 32 tapping practitioners from all over the world on every issue under the sun. The first year we did it, the tagline was "Show up and see if Gene dies," because literally I'm sitting in this seat in this same blue shirt for 24 straight hours, interviewing lots of folks. And then it's like any other fundraiser. We just ask people to donate, but you don't have to donate. If you go to 24hourstapping.com, every issue under the sun is covered in that, including, and this is super, super awesome, one of the interviews is from inside of a correctional facility in Virginia, in which we talk to inmates, in which we talk to correctional officers, in which we talk to the staff about how they are using tapping to transform and just see from the inside out. It's a profound hour conversation.
Thank you so much for that. And when is that happening? When is that 24 hours?
July 12th and 13th from 3 p.m. Eastern to 3 p.m. Eastern. And if you go to 24hourstapping.com and give us your email address, after the fact, we provide a link to every single interview as a standalone. We don't expect anybody to join us for 24 straight hours. It'll only me and my team that stay up for everything. And then after the fact, you get a chance to kind of choose your own adventure and find issues that make sense for you, because we literally talk about every possible way of applying tapping under the sun. And again, we talked to someone, Doctors Without Borders, who's doing work in East Africa. We talked to folks who are working with genocide survivors. Like, it's someone who is currently doing a bunch of training for practitioners in the Ukraine as all of it is going on there. Like, it's just, if nothing else, you're going to be heartwarmed to see the really amazing work going in the world, but you're going to learn so much, because some of the best tapping practitioners in the world graciously just give their time for free because they want people to be better and be healthy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was an absolutely wonderful conversation. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much, Gene.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care, and I hope we see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.